So if Jesus was God or the Son of God, and I mean, you can't hurt God, you can't kill God, then how did he really suffer? I mean, he was dead for 3 days, right? And then he came back. I mean, it was 3 days. That's really just like a bad weekend. Let's get to work. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Working Class Apologetics. I apologize for a delay between videos. It's been a super busy month at work, and I'm just happy to find the time today to be able to try to get one together. Now, you don't really hear these types of objections against Jesus and his suffering a whole lot, mainly because they're not too serious, they're not intellectual, they're more just flippant mockery of faith, and there are a lot of respectful people out there who aren't believers, but who wouldn't go this route. But they are out there, so I thought it would be a good idea to address it. And just like all of these mockery-type objections, it just boils down to a lack of understanding, and this time about who Jesus is. Over a short series of videos, I hope to discuss this broader topic of who Jesus is, but today I'm going to stick with this bad weekend idea. And to do that, I'll need to talk about his humanity. Christians believe that Jesus is truly God and truly man. That he was not simply a spiritual being in the form of a man, and that he was not simply a man with great spiritual insight. Through the centuries, Christians have understood that the Bible teaches that God the Son's Spirit was physically born into the person of Jesus of Nazareth. This is what we call the incarnation, which means to become flesh. That word comes from the Latin Vulgate translation of John chapter 1, verse 14, which reads, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." God the Son, or the Word as John referred to him as, added to his nature the flesh, and with it took on the physical limitations of being human. We see these physical limitations numerous times in the Gospel accounts. He was born as a baby, and everyone knows that a baby is totally dependent on his mother and others around him. Still later, we're told that he needed food and water, and that he would grow weary and needed prayer and rest. And in Matthew 4, we see the devil tempting him, pushing him towards sin. Over and over, the Bible shows us this part of Jesus that was human. And this is what Paul meant when he wrote in Philippians 2, verse 7, "But made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men." By taking on flesh, he emptied himself, by lowering and humbling himself, by adding this weakness of the flesh to his nature. And yet he prevailed over sin. He was limited by the weakness of the flesh in certain ways, but he was spiritually pure and morally perfect. Just imagine all the times that you've been mocked, that you've been angry or impatient, that you held a grudge over something small, or maybe you've let fear hold you back from doing the right thing. All of us have failed many, many times in these situations, but Jesus never did. Think of how exhausting it is at times to fight the flesh and do the right thing. We all have our breaking points. Jesus never broke, but I don't think that means he didn't feel the weight and the pressure of the flesh. Let's look at it this way. Jesus was of lowly birth, raised in a small nowhere town by a day laborer and a mother who had gotten pregnant with him in an unknown and questionable way. Now, I know first century Israel was completely different in many ways than 21st century America, but I think that the wicked ways in which people treat each other was probably the same. I'd be willing to bet that Jesus' experiences growing up, emotionally and mentally, were worse than what a lot of us have gone through. But this brings us to the meat of this whole video. You know, as a human being, when you get cut, it hurts. You bleed. The same was so for Jesus. And let's think of some of the physical pain that he was put through. After he was arrested unfairly in the middle of the night, he was spat on, pronounced deserving of death, beaten, and turned over to the Romans. Later, the Roman guards would beat him some more, and mock him some more, spit on him some more. They fashioned a crown of thorns and shoved it onto his head. Now, these were not thorns on a rose bush. Think more of like a locust tree, and imagine having those thorns shoved into your skin. He was then whipped and forced to walk all the way to the place of his death. He was laid bare on a cross, and had 3 nails hammered into his flesh, one in each hand and one in his feet. Now, even by Roman estimations, and the Romans were the best executioners in all history, crucifixion was the worst possible way to die. And Christ hung there for hours, fighting against the pain in his arms and legs, fighting against the ripping of his shoulders and collarbones, fighting for breath, until he breathed his last, in which he was dead for 3 days. Not a mystical death, not a he was hiding somewhere, literally dead for 3 days. And it shouldn't surprise me that people can be so calloused and mocking about what Jesus went through. They did it then, and they've done it ever since. But using it as an argument against Christianity or against Christ himself just shows so much misunderstanding of what we believe and who he was. Truly God and truly man. Thankfully, after those 3 days, he did rise, proving that he was who he said he was. And it's important to remember this human side of Christ so that we really understand what he did for us. He met us where we were. He humbly lowered himself into the flesh. And then he lived the perfect life that none of us can, and he suffered gravely for it. All so that all those who believe in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Now, of course, human nature is not the only aspect of Jesus, and understanding the deity and divine nature of Christ is just as important. I hope that you'll join me next time as I try to tackle that subject as well. I'm Derek Brown for Working Class Apologetics. Thanks for watching.